Hello, everyone, and welcome to Talk Nerdy. It is Monday, May 15th, and I'm your host, Cara Santa Maria. I have to apologize for the show coming out just a few hours later than usual. I've been traveling quite a bit, and I'm just playing catch-up. But I'm here now, and I'm really excited about this week's episode when we talk with Dr. Shaena Montanari. But before we jump into that, I want to thank those of you who made Talk Nerdy possible this week. And I know I say it every week, but I do think it bears repeating. Talk Nerdy is and will always be 100% free to download, and that is mostly because of the support of listeners just like you. Most people show their support by pledging via Patreon. That's at patreon.com/talknerdy. And there you can pledge any dollar amount from, just a few cents to a few bucks. And you pledge on a per episode basis. That is probably the bulk of the way that the show gets supported. I do sell ads from time to time, and other ways that the show is supported are through my PayPal portal, which you can find at carasantamaria.com, or by shopping in the online store where I have a bunch of really cool Talk Nerdy merch that 100% goes to pay for the show, to pay me, as I am the only one who works on this show, to do all of the, booking and producing and editing and all the things that are necessary, the many hours that I put into it. But you can also support the show in a non-monetary way by sharing it on social media and by rating and reviewing through iTunes or Google Play, or all of the other places where you can find the RSS feed. So all of those things help. They are awesome, and I really couldn't do it without you guys. So I want to give props to my biggest supporters this week. Through the PayPal portal, I want to thank Rob Schreck, and through the Patreon portal, I want to thank Phil T-Bear, Timothy Glover, Jonathan Wright, Christian Jeffrey, David Laser, Jeffrey Perez, Stuart Ogg, The Honorable Husband, Jafe, Gabriel Felipe Jaramillo Gonzalez, Brian Holden, and Jeffrey Sewell. I really, honestly couldn't do it without you guys. All right, I'm super pumped that I had a chance to speak remotely with a very inspiring individual. Her name is Dr. Shaena Montanari. She talks about her journey from geology to paleontology to science communication and now into science policy. And it's fascinating. One thing I'll say is, who knew dinosaur eggs could tell you so much? All right, guys. So without any further ado, here she is, Dr. Shaena Montanari. Well, Shaena, thank you so much for joining me today.
Oh, it's great to talk to you.
I'm really, really excited to have a paleontologist on the show because I am a massive paleo nerd. But of course, I don't have any formal education in it except for one class I took in college, and it made me a lifelong lover of dinosaurs. Not that I wasn't since I was a little kid. So I have to just start with that. You studied geology first, but then you went comparative anatomy, right? That's kind of
yeah.
Okay, yeah, that's like one of the paths that you can take when you get into paleo. What made you know that this was going to be the kind of life course you were going to take?
Paleontologists come from actually many different backgrounds because the discipline really encompasses many other scientific disciplines. I mean, I would say you could come at it almost from any perspective. Mostly geosciences or biology. So I don't know, it's probably, I don't know statistics on this officially, it's probably about half and half. Some people come from a geosciences background, like undergraduate, and then some come from a biology or an anatomy or an evolutionary biology background. But everybody kind of brings different skills in that. And so, yeah, I mean, how did I know? Like you and like most kids, I really did like dinosaurs, but I wasn't it's kind of funny. I wasn't probably dino obsessed, and that people are always kind of surprised to hear that. But I just liked everything. I liked rocks, and I liked animals, and I liked nature, and science. And so I just had a kind of a really strong general interest in earth sciences. So that's what kind of took me to do earth science when I was doing undergraduate at the University of North Carolina in Chapel Hill. And I really just knew I liked researching, so I thought I'd get started researching. And so I ended up, just because my undergraduate advisor was a geochemist, and he, asked, do I want to try to work in his lab? And so that, and learning about the applications of geochemistry to animals, paleontology, archaeology, that sort of got me hooked and being like, wow, this is really interesting. I can is a way that I can combine everything I like about science sort of under one roof. The paleontology roof. I could do it all by studying geochemistry and paleontology and biology and geology. But yeah, I kind of came at it through a chemistry way.
Yeah, so I guess I have to say, before we even move on, like geochemistry, what is that? Is that the chemistry of the rocks? Like, what does that encompass? It seems like it could be so much.
Yeah, it's basically just a term we use, we're talking about chemistry, maybe not in a sense that you might think of it like your high school chemistry class, but the chemistry of rocks and fossils and of earth processes. And yeah, sometimes we say biogeochemistry if we're also including like biological cycles. Like, I've done studies on wetlands, for example, and looked at, this is not a paleontology project, but it's sort of related to chemistry, and that you're doing biogeochemistry. Like, what are crops doing, and how does that impact the soil, and how does that cycle back into the earth? So you get a little bit of each: biology, geology, and chemistry when you study things like that. So yeah, it's basically just chemistry of the earth.
That's cool. So you, even after undergrad, you had a pretty big and diverse toolkit when you went in to get your graduate degree. And your graduate degree is actually in comparative biology, right? And how cool is this? You got your graduate degree from the graduate school at the American Museum of Natural History.
Yeah, exactly. Comparative
I didn't even know
biology.
There was a graduate school there, I have to say.
It's funny. I still get that a lot. And now it's 2017, and we're about 9 years into the program existing at the American Museum of Natural History. I was actually in the first class ever of that graduate program. It's called the Richard Gilder Graduate School at the American Museum of Natural History, and it takes 4 to 5 students a year, and we're all getting PhDs in comparative biology, but studying very different things. So it doesn't necessarily mean just paleontologists. There's people who study fish, people who study lizards, parasites, microorganisms, algae, birds. So you can actually come at it from comparative biology from sort of any way you want to in that program, provided, AMNH does a ton of research, so there's a lot of different venues you can pursue. But actually, the AMNH has had a graduate a program in a way that they've been associated with Columbia University and the City Universities, New York, for many years. And so there are actually many scientists that have come through the halls, who have done most of their research at the museum. But this was the first official graduate program that was at the museum, where the degree is actually granted from the museum.
That is so cool. So you basically have like the collections at your disposal. You have some incredible resources that a lot of other graduate students would have to actually travel to museums to be able to use.
Right. Yeah. It's nice to have that sort of inside track. I mean, you can just decide, if I think of something about a specimen or a fossil or anything, if I want to compare something, if I'm looking at fossil mammals and I want to say, I want to look at a modern mammal, I can go do that, in an afternoon or the next day by asking, because I'm, nearby. So you actually, nearby is in down the hall. The museum is pretty big. Sometimes it takes 10 minutes to walk from one side to the other, but, you can just ask and generally see everything you want to see. So that's a pretty unique opportunity to have, one of the world's best collections, at least in paleontology. Absolutely. World-class collection just at your fingertips to look at whenever you want to.
Oh, so cool. And of course, comparative biology, that doesn't just imply that you're doing paleo, right? You're looking at a lot of, I guess, extant species as well. Like what kind of an education do you get when you study comparative biology?
Yeah, I think it's a really fascinating framework to study paleontology in, that sort of grounds it with some good real world applications, because instead of, I think sometimes people think, I just stare at a dinosaur bone and describe the shape of it or something. And I actually don't really do that. And I know people do that, and that's good. We need that work done. But so once you've got that description of the dinosaur bone, it's like, well, now what? Like, where does that fit in a larger context, or what more can I say about it? And I have usually looked at chemistry or, small scale features in bones, and to see what that means, you really do have to compare it to other groups, or, this is one size of bone cells in dinosaur bones. Well, what are they like in mammals? What are the bone cell size like in birds? What is it like? So, I mean, to really draw some evolutionary conclusions, you really do have to compare. And that's something that sometimes does often get left out of some studies. I feel like it's just, you're not putting it in an evolutionary comparative context, which I think is really vital.
And so what are your favorite, I mean, obviously you went on to do a postdoc. You are, a fellow now, or were a fellow. I'm not sure. Are you still in Edinburgh?
So actually my career, I do love paleontology, and I always will be a paleontologist, but I am actually taking sort of a career, doing a little bit of a divergence from an academic career and working in science policy. And I think that, yeah, so I mean, it's a little, and communication. So I guess it's sort of, I feel like utilizing a lot of the strengths that I've gathered over the years in paleontology, and being comparative. I feel like I like a lot of different things too. I just have very broad interests. So that sort of bodes well for being a good communicator and good at making policy, and meeting different groups of people and kind of figuring out what's important to them and what they want to know about science. So I did do a postdoc after graduate school at Columbia University, where I was teaching. And then after that, I got a great opportunity to be a postdoc, or a research fellow, which was a cool position at the University of Edinburgh that was sponsored by the Royal Society, which is sort of like the National Academies of Science in the U.S. It's like that. So it was a really great opportunity to spend 2 years at the University of Edinburgh, just having this great international experience too, along with all the cool research and people that I met there.
Absolutely. And so how long have you been back now in the States?
Just got back at the end of February, so that was my 2 years. It went very quickly.
Wow.
And now I'm back. I know it goes so fast. I mean, that's one thing with an academic career. You kind of move a lot, and that's okay. But sometimes you would like to maybe settle down a little more.
For sure.
and just have a home. I've been living out of suitcases and boxes, and having stuff in storage for many years now. So, hoping to settle down a little bit more soon. But actually, so one of the things that kind of comes along with paleontology, as you alluded to, is that people really love it and want to hear more about it. So I started doing a lot of writing about probably like 2 years ago. And since then, I've sort of had this science communication career taken off.
Absolutely. And so I want to, before we dive into kind of the science policy work and the SciComm, which I love to talk about, that's my true love. I want to talk about some of the research that you did do, and like what kinds of discoveries were made. And I love this idea of like paleo meets comparative biology meets geochemistry. This really sort of, I don't want to call it a non-traditional path to paleontology, because like you said, there are like a ton of different ways people come into it. But when we think paleontology, we think like, oh, you dig up dinosaur bones. But that is like not at all what you did, right? I'm seeing some really interesting publications about like eggshells. Like, tell me a little bit about some of the cool research that you were doing.
I guess, yeah. So my, actually, dinosaur eggshells are really good for geochemistry work. I can explain that. But so my idea was that there's big collections, and we have these great fossils, but kind of what else can we use them for besides just describing them and saying, oh, here's this fossil and it belongs to this species, and this species is related to this one. Like, beyond that, what can you say? And actually, there was a whole suite of tools that have existed or even getting better over the past decades and few years. Things like what I do, geochemistry for one. There's, analytical tools we use to do that, but also things like digital scanning and CT scanning of fossils, really getting these unprecedented looks at fossils we've already had, and then you can look at them even closer and say more interesting things about them. And so because it's this whole new world of research by taking things that have been maybe dug up for 100 years or more and reanalyzing them in a way that gives you even more info. I mean, you see this happening with not just my work, but when people look at melanosomes in feathers to look at dinosaur feather color, like they're looking up close with great microscopes to see the shape of the cells that make up the feathers, and that reflects the color of what it was. So, you can, that was not really possible before. And now that we have the techniques, we can really look close. Although I did dig up quite a few dinosaurs in my day, and I still do. I still like to do field work, actually. That's one of the things that I like so much about paleontology, is that you can have lab work and cool museum work, but then you can also travel a lot and find fossils in the field.
What was your favorite place to do field work?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to say, but I think gotta say Mongolia. I mean, that's the crowning jewel of fossil trips, is to get the opportunity to go to the Gobi Desert, especially on the AM&H Gobi Desert trip, which has been around. Well, I mean, it started in the early 20s with Roy Chapman Andrews and his original expeditions when he discovered Velociraptor and, oviraptor eggs and all those kinds of things. And the first really well-publicized case of dinosaur eggs ever. But that was an amazing trip to be able to go on twice, actually. I did get to go twice while I was in graduate school. But I've been other really cool places. I've been to Australia. I've been to, just most recently, I did go to Romania recently. And then when I was in Scotland, we would do some hunting on the Isle of Skye, which is this beautiful giant island in the west coast of Scotland that's really just breathtaking. It has actually some really cool fossils there too. Usually not dinosaurs, usually find mammals and other marine reptiles, but there's dinosaur footprints. We'd like to find the bones of those dinosaurs, but they're kind of hard to find. So we see a lot of footprints actually. But so yeah, I mean, having these opportunities to travel and see these amazing sites is one of the coolest parts about being a paleontologist. I think you don't have to do that. Some people really don't like going outside, and that's okay. You can still be a paleontologist and work inside and do your indoor work. And also just, now these days, like I was saying, collecting so much data, a lot of it's done on the computer. And I do a lot of work on the computer, but big databases and things like that are all really, we need people who actually have really good skills to analyze big data sets now. And that's primarily done on the computer. So we actually get people coming from, stats backgrounds and computer science backgrounds who are good at programming and just really like the subject matter. And so they can do studies, kind of help us, or even do studies on their own of these databases that we've amassed, because, some paleontologists, at least in the past, weren't necessarily like really well versed at computing. But now these days we have to be good at everything.
Yeah, it's interesting how I think as most of these fields evolve, and even something like paleontology, which I think when you compare it to most of the sciences, we think of it as maybe not necessarily as old as many of the sciences, but very kind of hands-on, right? We don't often think of it as being like a high-tech science, even though it absolutely is now. It's interesting to note how interdisciplinary all of these fields have to be in order to keep up with the tools and the technology that's necessary to answer some of these big research questions.
No, that's definitely true. I mean, when you see fossils sometimes in a museum and they're like a skull and it's cut in half to look on the inside, and you're like, why did they cut that skull in half or something? But that fossil was probably from over 100 years ago. And the only way to see, if you had a nice skull, to see the brain, what the brain case looked like, would be to just cut it in half. I mean, a CT scanner, or CAT scanner, as most people say in medical terms, there's just the same thing. I don't know, people probably know this, but it's just, you put a solid object in and it slices it like one slice at a time, then puts it all together in a 3D image. And so you can go through slice by slice. That's actually like what we used to do to fossils,
like
the
physically
same thing.
Used to do, yeah,
physically do it. But then at the end, it's gone. At the end, you've destroyed the entire thing. So we don't have to do that anymore. So now we have these amazing techniques, and even like things like 3D printing is getting really unbelievable. Just I'm not even that old. And I, thinking of back when I started learning about this stuff to now, I see huge changes just in the technology. Because sometimes I think, oh, 3D printing, like I remember trying that, in 2007, and I was like, it just was some like kind of crappy plastic thing, and it didn't work, and it was all lumpy and stuff. And then now I see like some of my friends are printing like animals, the skin is clear and it's got different colored internal organs, and it's like this unbelievable models of things. I'm like, you made that with a 3D printer, so now things like that are happening. So there's just, the sky is really, is really the limit with studying paleontology and using these new techniques to learn more about it. But we do have to get a little more technologically savvy. And I always say to people, it's like, learn how to code.
Yeah, that's very, very good advice. I think that it's going to be necessary for basically any student coming through any of the sciences, if they're just now starting in undergrad, is they're going to have to know how to code. It's going to be required. But also a lot of them already know how. It's kind of like a language that they're learning in school now, which was not, I think, available to us when we were in high school and early college, for sure.
Oh, no, not at all. No one ever suggested learning anything like that.
No.
And I'm like, now I definitely would. It just wasn't in my like, it was never an idea to learn how to code. It just never came up. And it was funny because I was pretty good at science growing up, and I was a nerd, whatever. So that's why I'm on the Talk Nerdy podcast. But I was a nerd. I was always good at science, but no, and I had good teachers, and they just never ever suggested to me to learn how to code. Like, it was just never, and it never crossed my mind, and now I'm glad that students and young scientists are learning how to code.
Yeah, absolutely. Because it's like we said, it's necessary. It's not even like, oh, it's a good skill to have. Oh, that'll help a little bit. It's like, no, you like have to be able to do that, or it's going to be really hard for you to get by. So I have to ask one more question about your research before we move on to what you're up to now. And it's the meanest question ever, but do you have a favorite dinosaur? Or I should just say a favorite paleontological specimen? I don't want to limit it to just dinosaurs. You might have a favorite extinct mammal. I don't know.
Right. Oh, yeah. So I guess I can kind of wrap this into like further describing the research that I did not do with the previous question, which was about what I did with dinosaur eggs. I really like dinosaur eggs. I think they're really neat. They look, they're all comes in all shapes and sizes. Some really look like bird eggs, and some are giant, kind of like almost soccer ball size, and some are really long and have these cool patterned kind of lumpy bumps on the surface. And so I like dinosaur eggs. I think the coolest specimen is the one that's called Big Mama, that's in the AMNH, that was found in 1993 in Mongolia. That's an oviraptor mom, like sitting on a big nest of eggs. It's a pretty famous specimen. It's really awesome. And that's cool because, so I like to look at the eggs because the eggshells are made of calcite, which is a calcium carbonate, which is in bone also, but it's a different material than bone. It's kind of like what seashells are made out of calcium carbonate. So you can actually analyze the chemistry of those, and those tell you about environments in the sense that you can look at carbon and you can look at oxygen in that mineral, calcium carbonate, and it will tell you about what the water was like and what the vegetation was like via the animal that ate it and then made that mineral, because those minerals are made inside the dinosaur as it's laying an egg. And that can also tell you about the environment, the diet, and also the temperature, the body temperature of the animal. So I did collaborate on a cool paper a couple of years ago doing a new chemical method to figure out what the temperature of the precipitation of the eggshell mineral was. And that tells you the body temperature roughly, and that it was actually a little bit cooler than birds is what we got from that eggshell, that one specific eggshell, and those were from Mongolia. So there's a lot that you can tell from eggs, and I think they're sort of an underutilized resource in paleontology, and I just think they're kind of fun and interesting to look at. And sometimes they have baby dinosaurs inside, which is cool when we find them, but not usually. But if you're really lucky, you see the little bones inside. I would say Big Mama at AMNH. It's on display on the 4th floor too, if anyone's walking through. A model of it, not the actual one. We keep that elsewhere.
I would not be surprised if there is at least one listener right now with the earbuds in walking through the American Museum of Natural History in New York and is like, holy crap, I guess I'll just go walk up and go see that.
Yeah, you can run by it, and it's in between the two dinosaur halls. It's sort of like a little pass-through hallway, and it's got some of the what it's like to excavate in Mongolia set up, so you can check that out.
It's so cool. Yeah, it's true. Because I feel like a lot of times we think about what can you do with dinosaur bones? And I guess the traditional wisdom is like, okay, so we can carbon date them to figure out how old they are. We can't do anything with DNA because the DNA doesn't can't persist for that long, so it's all degraded. And then, okay, yeah, we now know that you can do some CT scanning and look at brain cases, and we can maybe find skin texture or feather texture if we're super lucky. And that's it. Like, they're old. We can't do anything else with them. But there's so much that you can do, like you said, with the geochemistry.
Right. Yeah. I read the chemistry. Yeah. I mean, you can't. And the thing is, dating is tough because we don't have organic material really because radiocarbon dating is actually only on organic material. So you can actually only go back about. I just don't want anyone listening to this to be like, she didn't say anything.
No, for sure.
That it could actually only go back about 50 or 60,000 years. But we do have other.
It's basically just a little bit older than DNA. How long does DNA persist?
Well, so DNA's half-life is 521 years. Don't
That's
ask me how
nothing.
I know that.
Yeah,
it's nothing. Yeah, it was nothing. So that's nothing. So, I mean, some older, we do have, I think, I'm going to say around 100,000 years would be the oldest DNA that we have. And we can get some, like, if it's frozen, it's a little bit better. You can now, with the next generation sequencing methods, you can pick really tiny parts of the genome apart, like tiny little fragments, and put them together again. So we're actually getting better luck at recovering older piece. I mean, it just means that there's not as much DNA, so it's possible to sequence it, but sometimes it just gets too swamped out by other things, and you can't really put it together anymore. So, but you can get. So yeah, so I mean, carbon dating and DNA only go back so far. So we have to really think of some other ways. We actually don't know sometimes how old dinosaur fossils are that we find. It's not a trivial issue. We have to find other rocks with the dinosaurs that we can date that have certain minerals that we're able to date using other techniques and other elements. So it's actually, that's a whole different way that people get into paleontology too, is that some people are what we call geochronologists. They date rocks. They date rocks.
And so they're still using isotopes. They're just not using carbon dating.
Yeah, right. There's all different types of isotopes. Like my geochemistry work is stable isotopes, so they're not radioactive. They do not decay. There's also, there are other radioactive isotopes that you can use to date, like uranium. You can use that to date rocks. It decays to lead, so you can look at that ratio. These techniques are quite complicated. So I mean, most of the time, people will devote their entire research. If they're a researcher on dating geochronology, that will be what they do. Like they'll look at a system of an elemental system for dating, be it potassium or lead or something like that, and they'll date rocks. And so sometimes we get to work with people like that because, they think, okay, cool, fossils. And so they can use their geochronology techniques to then date fossils. And it kind of a great way to work together, and everybody gets to learn about something new in that respect. So it's fun.
Yeah. Yeah. Really, again, it just, I think, contributes to that idea that, like, you need so many different specialists in order to really inform an entire field and to come up with, like, theories that stand the test of time. Is one person can't do it all because one person can't possibly know enough about all the different required, I guess, lines of reasoning.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, it is really kind of too much for one person to know. And sometimes it's good, someone from outside the field says something and you're like, wow, that's a really good idea. You just never thought of it. It can kind of help you broaden your horizons too and think of some new hypotheses. So there's lots of collaboration. Paleontologists, gosh, collaborate with all. I mean, I just like no type of scientist. I don't think that a paleontologist has not collaborated with pretty much. I mean, a lot of medicine actually, now that we do scanning of bones and things, there's a lot of medical overlap that people work in hospitals doing scanning, looking at bones, and then some paleontologists actually get into imaging just in general, and so they actually work in medical imaging too. And so it's really unbelievable how it makes you really well-rounded. So I do tell people to study paleontology, even if they don't want to be paleontologists. It's a good way to learn about a lot of different fields.
Oh, absolutely. We had on the show, actually, I've had two different paleontologists on the show, Michael Habib of the Museum of Natural History of Los Angeles County, and of course Neil Shubin was on the show, both of whom got into paleo through comparative anatomy, and both of whom teach or have taught gross anatomy, which is another interesting overlap with medicine.
Right, yeah, people, it's funny because I have not taught gross anatomy before, but people, a lot of my friends are medical doctors, and I always tell them, look, the person who's teaching you or taught you gross anatomy might have been a paleontologist, because that's a big, it's so hard, it is so hard to find academic jobs, and paleontology isn't super, there's not a ton of paleontology jobs at any university, and maybe you're lucky if you have one. It's not even a position that every university would need or have, so medical studies is more common, so that's definitely where paleontologists can get jobs. So I would say, yeah, learn coding and learn anatomy if you're in paleontology, because you can always teach human anatomy, and that's a really valuable skill to have, because it's always in high demand. But I would say, like, those other people you mentioned, like Mike Khabib, like, his research is not just anatomy, it's also really physics, because he's like, studies the physics of flight and things, so there's just so many different sciences that factor into paleontology.
Absolutely. And then Neil Shubin, of course, is all kind of like evolution and change, and sort of how certain species beget other species, or like what those intermediary changes are, and comparing these functional and anatomical structures of really old things. It's super cool to see kind of all the different ways that people go into paleontology, which again is a real job. Like, I kind of was interested in it when I was young, but I didn't really realize that it was a real thing. Like, I knew people did it, but I didn't know that it was attainable. You know what I mean? Because my local university didn't have a paleo department. So because there was no real paleo sort of at kind of a commuter college close to where I grew up, I didn't really realize that it was an option that was available to me, and, went other routes. But probably in another life, I might have studied paleo just because it was like one of my first loves.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's it's not very common, but some courses do incorporate a little bit of paleo, which I think is where most people get it from, like a biology class or a geology class. But yeah, I think having a paleontology class is always popular. I mean, I think the paleontology class at Florida State that Greg Erickson teaches, the paleontologist who studies a lot of like bone cell structures and bone microstructures, is like the biggest class at Florida State, and he has an overflow room, and it's like 1,000 people. I mean, it's just
that's so crazy.
It's a dinosaurs class, and it's it's just one of the most popular classes in the history of the university. People just die for it; they love it. So
yeah, I think how can you not? How can you not? They're so interesting. And it's like, you never have to grow up if you love dinosaurs. That's the best part about it. You get to be a kid forever. So you love dinosaurs, but you love much more than dinosaurs, and you love SciComm. And apparently now you're getting more into science policy. So I have to ask kind of what made you decide that you wanted to make that shift, because I have a lot of people on the show who I'm fascinated by, and I'm really excited by the fact that they have non-traditional careers. Like, they studied in academia and they did all the academic work, but they're no longer wanting to stay within academia. And I think it provides hope for a lot of young people who are in academia right now who think like, but what if I don't want to be a professor? Like, are there other options available to me? Yes, there are. There are a lot. So tell me about what made you want to start making that transition.
Yeah, it's kind of hard to say like exactly when, but I kind of have always been lucky enough to do what I wanted to do, and have had a lot of, at the time, and have had a lot of good opportunities. But I guess, I don't want to say I don't regret anything, but I think I was young and naive. I didn't really realize how hard it would be to get a career in academia, or what it was like. I just had no idea. I had no idea what being a professor really meant. I just assumed I liked school. Maybe I'll be a professor. I had no idea. I don't know if anyone really told me, or if I didn't ask, or what. But as the reality, when you're in grad school, and sort of the reality kind of comes on you of what it's really like to work in academics, and it's not all bad. I mean, it's great. It is one of the best careers. If you can get it and make it work, it is one of the best careers in the world. There's tons of freedom. You can really do anything you want. You just have an idea, and you can, write someone and ask for money, and can I do this? Or and I guess therein lies one of the problems: money. There's not a lot of funding for science in the United States, and that across the board is a problem. And that's a problem, just today with the budget being, released for this is just keep in mind for the rest of the year until October 1st. It's not like it's a victory in a sense, but it's also, this should have happened last September. And now it's May. So, this is the problem that we have, is that we can't agree on these things. But again, most people really like science. It doesn't matter what side of the political spectrum you're on. People like science, and they generally trust scientists. And the amount that they trust scientists has not changed that much over time. People generally trust scientists. So they do want to fund science, but when you keep funding levels for places like the National Science Foundation at we didn't lose, this budget just came through, did not cut NSF, but it didn't give much more to NSF. And so in line with inflation, we're actually not getting enough money to really fund the research. Keeping it the same is starving research. I'm sorry, it's kind of to digress, but when you have single percentage funding rates in most disciplines, basically between 4 and 8% of people who apply for grants get them. That's very damaging and very hard to make it. And I'm not saying, don't try, you can't make it. Or I'm not saying, oh, I couldn't have made it. I'm just saying, do I want that? Do I want to be fighting like that in my career, the way things are right now? And I just decided, I really like teaching and writing about science, and telling people about science, and also making the world more positive with science. That gets me a little more excited than, the endless rat race of grants and the academic lifestyle. But I think that being an academic is the best. Like I said, it's one of the best jobs you could have. And some people who are academics, if that's what you want, I say go for it. I know how hard it is to get a job, but I would 100% of the people I know who wanted it, from the bottom of their soul and really, really wanted it, never gave up. And they all eventually did get their job, and ended up with their tenure track job. I don't really know anyone personally. I know this isn't a study or anything, but I'm saying personally, the people that I know who really never gave up always did ended up with the job at the end of the day.
Yeah, but they may have done 4 postdocs before they got there, but yeah.
Exactly. And you live a year without salary, or you have relationships are tough, and things with if you have kids, and so some of the people I know have had to put up with so much. And if you just decide look, I don't think this is for me, there are a lot of other options out there for you, and it still can use your science education as an asset. It's definitely not a waste. I wouldn't say just to get a PhD to then see what happens afterwards. I think you should really know what you want to do before you start, because sometimes you might not need to spend the time on a PhD if you can achieve your goals without it, which it could be possible. So just, I'm not saying everyone do a PhD, but if, I think a lot of us have found ourselves, we finished PhDs and did a postdoc and being like, oh no, now what do we do besides academia? When there are actually a lot of things you can do.
Absolutely. And so I want to hear about what some of those things that you're doing now are.
Right. So I've really started doing a lot of work in science communication. So that started I would say roughly about 2 years ago, where I got offered through a friend, I did get offered a blogging gig. I guess it's sort of a blog contributor relationship at Forbes.
Yeah, and so were you already doing your personal blog at that point, or did you really start writing when you started writing for Forbes?
Yeah, I had done a small blog at PLOS with a friend, two paleontology friends at PLOS. We had a little paleontology blog, but it was not very
And PLOS
popular.
is the public library of science, right? It's like an open access kind of way to be able to look at some cool science that's happening.
Yeah, so they had kind of the early days of their blog network there, and we wrote a couple of posts, and it was, it wasn't super duper popular, but some people read it. But it was a good experience.
But it's good practice. Yeah, it's always good to start writing when nobody's reading what you're writing, I think.
Yes, it definitely is. And then, so I had this opportunity come up at Forbes, and I was like, oh, okay, so now I'm going to be a science, start writing science seriously. And it's been about two years this month in May, and I've written, I don't even know, I have to check, probably 170 something posts, and it sort of transformed my career in that, now I have people email press releases and, giving me early copies of papers to write about and doing interviews, and, it was probably at first not the best science writing in the universe, but I feel like I've steadily gotten better at it, and and really enjoyed that experience. And it's actually then now I've started freelancing, so I write for other shows too. I write for do you know Joe Hanson's show on PBS
Oh,
Digital
yeah, that's
Studios?
great.
So actually written a couple of scripts with Joe, which
And
is
he just won a
awesome.
Webby. He won like best science
He
host, right?
did. He's best host. He was best host.
Oh, he's
Like,
best
just
host. That's even better. That's amazing.
Yes. Yeah, so because he's amazing and he's great, and Joe also has a PhD in
That's
biology.
true.
But,
yeah.
So that's
but he's been doing SciComm for years and years and years, even while he was working on his PhD. Joe is, I think, one of my earlier guests. He might have been in like the first 10 episodes or maybe the first 20 episodes on Talk Nerdy.
Oh, really? Yeah. So he's a good. I mean, it's. Results may vary. I don't think most of us are going to have a YouTube show with that many subscribers, but
But he's also been doing it a long time,
He's
so
been doing
I think
it a long time.
Yeah,
Yes.
the longer you're at it, the bigger the audience grows for sure.
Yeah, no, that's definitely true. Even a couple, short couple years, I've seen that happen for myself, and so it is fairly rewarding. And I think the thing that I like about science communication is that you get to interact with people and see direct results from what you write, which in a research career you might not often see. And you have the ability to translate it to the public and show them how it means, what it means and how it matters to them directly.
Yeah.
And that's really fun and unique opportunity to do. And I think that is what has gotten me interested in policy, because I do like communications, but I think that being good at communications can help you in policy a lot. I think being able to use my science skills to make hopefully good things happen in Washington would be the excellent, be excellent. And that's and again, it's something that you could try and go back to your academic career if you like, or work in an industry or work for a nonprofit. So I think that the policy experience gives you even more skills that you can utilize in other arenas.
Absolutely. So I was just in Washington the weekend before last for the March for Science. I co-hosted the rally before the march up on stage with Derek Muller of Veritasium, of his YouTube channel, Physics YouTube, and then Questlove Gomez, the drummer from The Roots. And
cool.
Yeah, it was super awesome. And the most awesome part about it, other than how much fun it was, is that it was pouring down rain, and there was still I don't even know, over 100,000 people there. I mean, the turnout and the passion for science policy and for basically kind of representing and ensuring that the voices of science and that the voices of scientists are heard, that the funding is where it needs to be. I mean, I was really, really inspired by how many people came out and marched and really had loud voices and wanted to make sure they were heard. And it was right in front of the White House, which was also really cool to be able to just see the White House in the background. But it gave me some hope, I think, for the future, because it's very easy to get sort of disillusioned in this era of difficulty, I guess is a good way to put it, with science policy. And is it really the current administration? Is it the current political climate that made you realize, this is kind of where I think my talents are needed?
I will admit, so there is, so this is kind of tentative at this point because I have not placed yet, but I had wanted to do the AAAS Science and Technology Policy Fellowship. And it's, for people who haven't heard of it, it's been around for about 4 decades. And it's a transitional fellowship for PhDs in any science who want to work in Washington for a year and do science policy.
Gotcha.
So it's this great program, that everybody's heard about. And so I was like, I'm gonna do that. And that application is due on November 1st. So that of 2016, that's just when it's due every year. So I would, spent all summer getting my application ready, and I naively thought it would probably be different, if I'm envisioning myself in Washington and now in fall 2017, thinking what I was going to do at the time when I wrote the application.
Yeah, we had a very different idea of what the administration would look like. That is for sure.
Yeah, so I...
That's a good, easy way to put it.
Yeah, so I put that application in November 1st, and then things happened.
Yep.
And But then anyway, so I did end up becoming a finalist for that fellowship. And I was just in Washington, D.C. meeting as of 2 days ago, meeting with a variety of agencies, and me and my colleagues, about almost 200 other scientists who are also in this program, to get placed at an agency for this coming fall. And it's not 100% finished yet, but it's like it should be good. It should work out fine. I just have to wait and see.
So exciting.
Preemptively. It is exciting. Yes, it is preemptively exciting. But the thing is, this year kind of had a different feel to it, because we all still want to do it. I don't think their attrition rate was non-existent really for people who said, oh, thanks, but no thanks. I mean, the people who wanted to do it in fair weather still wanted to do it in this weather. It's like needed more, don't you think? No, I absolutely agree. And what I learned last week is that there are a lot of people, these agencies. I don't know. I mean, now I can say this since I'm not officially hired by anyone. This is the problem with science policy that I've found. Not a problem, but when you get involved and you sign on to an agency, then there's rules about opinions and things you can say, and you have to say, I'm not representing my agency when I say this. I have a lot of NASA friends like that, where it's like, you're my friend, come on the show, and they're like, I have to go through the press office, and and usually it's okay, but they have to be careful, because it's like, oh, well, you're a voice for NASA. No, exactly. And it's like you kind of have to be careful what you say. So I think that some people get frustrated when they see government scientists like maybe not saying something or doing something, but it's like you can't. Like you have to. And the thing is, with AAAS and other places, you have to be nonpartisan, because science is, you're supposed to be a trusted science advisor, and you can't be looking like you're only going to side with one side on every argument, because their argument, and that's probably true, is that when you come to the table with different organizations from different sides of the political spectrum, they won't trust you. And then if you're not trusted, you're not going to get anything done, and no one's going to want you at the table. So you really have to be, smart about the way you phrase things. But there are a lot of people who are still really wanting to do the work in Washington. I mean, that hasn't changed, and they're still going to be there and try to do the work that they can do. It's a little bit, worrisome. And I mean, like this fellowship, for example, is a great opportunity. In the past, when you reach this, week where you get placed in an agency, it's like very exciting. But now people are worried about funding, because we were there and we're not sure if the government's going to shut down or if there's going to be a budget decrease and where they're going to take that from. And so, we were kind of like, can we even start? Is it going to be, can we start? Is there problems with our funding? And that's kind of unfortunate, at least for scientists who want to do the work. We're going to be, it's not like they don't want to do the work. It's just that the funding, if it's not there anymore and programs are cut, they're going to be absolved of the opportunity to do the work, which is very kind of, upsetting. But absolutely. Yeah, I mean, it's a tough time right now. It's a tough position to be in, but at the same time, it's like we need voices that know what the priorities should be, and we need those voices to be present, because if we all just were to walk away and say, nothing's going to get accomplished and we're not going to be able to work together, then what are we left with? Yeah, exactly. I mean, we do have to keep in mind, we do have to work together. It's nothing. And this budget that just passed today, I mean, they actually did solve it with relatively, it wasn't actually as painful as it may have seemed, because I think their priorities, a lot of the priorities are similar for a lot of issues, especially with science. So you just have to, keep an open mind and like actually work with all the various stakeholders and kind of hear what they want and be there. So I guess it is important that scientists, maybe while government scientists can't say as much as they would want to, and you can't give opinions about things, and, maybe some people are getting shut out of jobs because of the funding issues. It is important then for scientists who are kind of outside that space, or just people who like science who are outside that space, to make their voices heard, because maybe they're the only ones that can. If you are a tenured professor, say something, like you can say with impunity whatever you want pretty much about it, at your university, like use that privilege. And because some of us, we do try to go to work in Washington, and because we want to make a difference, we might not be able to, say the same sort of things, or write as many op-eds, or depending what kind of agency you work for, because there's a variety. But as you were saying, your friends at NASA, people have to remember that's a government agency, so they can't really be making very strong comments at times.
Yeah, they've got to try and keep the politics out of it. And sometimes that's, I think, kind of easy. Like if you, for example, are, like most of my friends at NASA are involved in space research, whether they're a scientist or an engineer, it really is quite nonpartisan. Like it's very easy to reach across the aisle and talk about manned missions, or as they call them now, crewed missions, which makes sense, but it's really hard to say because it sounds like I'm saying crude, C-R-U-D-E. No, I'm saying C-R-E-U or C-R-E-W-E-D. These robotic missions, these remote missions like JPL. Most of my friends are at JPL because it's right here in LA. That's so it's so nonpartisan. It's like everybody knows how important space exploration is, and nobody's complaining about that. And there's certain aspects of science, I think paleo is one of them, where it's not political, really. I mean, there are extreme examples where it can become political if you're talking about like young Earth creationists or things like that. But really, most of the contentious stuff comes in the climate change arena, and that's where it becomes really, really difficult. But there are definitely ways to talk about it without talking about it. There are ways to approach it without politicizing it. And the vast majority of science, I think, is actually not caught up in these agenda-driven political kind of infights. It's just that the ones that do get caught up get the most press attention. So that's what we hear about the most.
Yeah, I think we have to, like I was saying, keep in mind people still generally like science, like scientists, and that it does a lot of areas do enjoy bipartisan support. But there are some areas, that I think scientists in general and all of us can work who are in those fields specifically can work harder to show the applications. NASA's popular because it's hard to say I don't like space, and sending people to space is interesting. But then sometimes, geosciences does get a bad rap a lot of the time because people just say, I don't see the point in doing some of this research. And, beyond maybe hazards research or looking at volcanoes. But even that, I mean, things like that actually do get shortchanged a lot research-wise. And so I think things that I feel have obvious importance will lack funding. And so I think that's why it's so important to get scientists in Washington who could really effectively say, hey, look, like this is what we need to be paying attention to. Don't ignore it, and explain, why do I see it so clearly? Why do I see the importance so clearly? And maybe people just don't think of it that way. Like you were saying earlier, we can't all be expected to know everything. And they need people who can, like a congressperson or a senator or a secretary of an agency needs someone, when they say, I need to know about X, it would be nice if they had a scientist who is an expert, or at least, even if I'm not an expert, I can probably figure out enough to like get you a brief on it, a 1-page brief in a couple hours. So that's what you really need scientists for. So I think that policy is a great place for scientists, and there's definitely a space and a need for it. So I would tell people that's another option that you can do, is science policy. And the theme of the AAAS meeting this winter was science policy, changing society through science policy. So it's something that's really, really quite vital that, PhD scientists can be really useful. And I mean, a lot of our science advisors, John Holdren, Obama's science advisor, PhD, he's a PhD, and Ernie Moniz, who was the former Secretary of Energy, PhD in physics, so these people actually do exist in Washington, but we could always use more.
Do you think we'd ever see a person in a high kind of political office, maybe not the president, but a pretty high political office that's not a specific science office, who came from the sciences and who has that kind of academic education? I feel like it would be so vital, but for some reason, now there is kind of a new movement, I think, of scientists like running for local office. But for some reason, it's just traditionally, it's always been political scientists, lawyers, business owners, MBAs, people of that sort of persuasion. And we don't often see scientists holding political office.
Yeah, I guess, I mean, the elected, often not elected office. And you do get, like, I was saying, Secretary of Energy, which would be sort of be a sciencey post, that's that president's pick. And they've, Obama did pick 2 PhD scientists for that role. But now we don't have one.
Yeah.
I mean, I think there would be Yeah, there is one. I don't know. I think there's one PhD in the Senate. I'm not sure. Yeah, so there's not many. And Rush Holt, who is the, president of AAAS, who is a PhD in physics and actually was then a congressman in New Jersey for many years.
True. And he spoke this weekend in Washington, and it was really inspiring.
Yeah, I think he's great. He's always very inspiring when he talks. And I think so someone like him, if they want to make the extra jump to get even, higher office than Congress and, maybe make it to Senate and beyond that, I think it's possible. I think some people are getting have gotten close, but I think maybe running for president is not something that a lot of people want to do.
No, so, you have to have a special kind of crazy to want to be the president, I think.
So you kind of maybe not want to do that, but I think there is definitely an opportunity, and maybe, a lot of the, like I said, this fellowship that sends PhD scientists to Washington, I wouldn't be surprised if the first president or vice president or something with a PhD comes from the AAAS fellowships, because those are going to maybe be the people that, that really want to do it, and really want to make that jump. It's so hard because when you get a PhD, it's because you love the science, because you have to spend so much time on it. So a lot of people don't want to leave, and that's totally fine. Like I said, if you want the academic job, try to stick with it. I wish there were more positions outside of academia. I would, government research jobs, but those again are kind of dwindling, and so hopefully we can work on that and get those back.
Yeah.
Or back or more than they ever were. I don't know. So it's tough. It's a tough issue to think about how to solve all these problems. But I think it's challenging and it's fun. So that's why I would like to try to work in science policy. So I will let you know how it goes.
Absolutely. Well, what a fun kind of time to be in transition right now. There's so much kind of opportunity available to you. And in some ways, it's funny because it's an obvious, I think, next step for somebody with your educational background, with your skill set, and with your interests. But at the same time, it probably sort of feels like you're starting a whole new career.
Yeah, it really does. I thank you for saying that it seems like an obvious next step, because I think it does. And I met a lot of other colleagues who were kind of similar to me and different, but, in the way that it's very clear that your conglomeration of experiences led you to be like, okay, I'm going to try to see if I can do something in science policy now. But it does feel like you're starting a new career. You can leave permanently or you can come back. About in this fellowship specifically, a quarter of the people end up coming back to academics and becoming professors. And some people are professors and just taking a year or two off as a sabbatical and doing the policy experience to bring back to their universities. So it doesn't necessarily mean you're setting your career, down the river and saying, bye, bye science career, it's over. But it can again. I think it just depends if you want. I think when you get wider experience outside of research, sky's kind of the limit about what you can do, whatever you want. PhDs always, the career prospects are daunting, and it does involve probably a lot more changing of jobs than most people would have in other fields, as being an academic scientist or an academic in general. But you just got to keep on trying new things if you want to expand your skills. It's a crazy life, and I think that's why a lot of us feel the need to start settling down, and maybe that's why we want to say, hey, let me try something else besides a tenure track job and more postdocs.
Absolutely. Well, I am definitely interested to hear the answers that you have for me for the final two questions that I ask every guest who comes on my show. And they're big picture questions. Are you ready for them?
Okay.
All right. So when you think about the future, and I think some of this we've touched on before, but I'd love to get your take. So when you think about the future in whatever context is relevant to you, obviously you're about to make some big changes in your life personally and professionally, but also this could apply to the future of the planet, the future of humankind, the future of, the universe. What is the thing, if you had to pick one thing, that first of all is kind of the most worrisome to you? What is the thing that keeps you up the most at night, that you are the most concerned about? But then, of course, on the flip side of that, so that we're not super depressed at the end of the podcast, what is the thing that you're most hopeful and optimistic and excited for when you think about the future?
Yeah, I feel like the one I'm most worried about changes on a day-to-day basis, because sometimes I learn new things and I'm like, I didn't even know that was a problem. Like just learning new things. I'm concerned about environmental things. I guess I'm also very concerned about talking the other day. I mean, now like net neutrality is a big thing on the table, and just so I was saying, you could like lose access to the internet. That I guess right now I'll say that's the most worrying thing to me, is our access to information, and how much we now rely on communications via internet. And I'm not saying that that's a bad thing, but because we kind of need to, but sometimes I go through this exercise, like, wonder if I didn't have my phone, what would I do? And then I'm like, oh my gosh, I don't know. And I mean, I know that people did live without these things in the past, but now like our banking's online and all our communications and our lives and all these things. So I think that net neutrality is a really big issue that we need to make sure that we all hopefully have access, promoting access and increasing access to information, and the internet is a big thing. And if something happens to that, we are kind of in trouble. That's just, I mean, my answer is normally like climate change, but that's just today. I was just thinking about that. It was very stressful last night. Actually, I think I did have a bad dream or something to do with that last night. So that was probably keeping me up at night. But I am the most hopeful, kind of on the flip side, that there's a lot of young people in inventing and like looking to make the world a better place. So I was fortunate to edit the Forbes 30 under 30 list for Europe this year. And just the things that young people are coming up with are so unbelievable, just with clean power technology and repurposing used batteries. Like we have electric cars. They use tons of batteries, and they actually will get completely spent at some point. And you have all this battery waste, and you think, now what? What do I do with all this battery waste? Well, there's people who are trying to figure out how can they reuse these pretty much dead batteries to power bikes in countries where they don't really have much power, like electric bikes and things like that. And so I'm just like, wow, these ideas, I never ever would have come up with. So I feel like there will be a lot of people rising to the challenge to meet a lot of these deficiencies that will keep coming up with. Like I said, I'm worried about access to the internet, one thing. Yeah, and then waste is another thing too. And so people who are really combating waste in a variety of ways and cleaning up the planet, or kind of slowing down the amount that we're creating a lot of waste and pollution, that's inspiring to me, because we really do need people to do that. And I think it works. I think if we invest appropriately in the right people, and and really pay attention to some of these young people coming up with great inventions, that one of them's going to save us. One or more will save us in the future.
Oh my gosh, absolutely. I had the honor this weekend and of course we always time travel on the show because this isn't going to air today. It's going to air in a couple of weeks. But I had the honor of keynoting at this Environmental Youth Leadership Summit this weekend in San Pedro, California, which is right by the port of Los Angeles, just down the coast near Long Beach. And it was a bunch of high school students and middle school students who all got together on a Saturday morning, which they were not required to go to, wow. and do this big summit where they shared their research, and they went to all these little breakout sessions and things. And I was able to just like chat with a lot of these young kids, and I was blown away, by how old the young kids seem now. They're so well spoken. They were so educated. And even when I was giving my talk, I was able to give a more sophisticated talk to these students than I usually do for the general public, because they know their shit so well, and they have such brilliant ideas. And it's like, these kids are going to be the kids who are making massive environmental impacts and coming out with really innovative solutions to some of these problems, like with waste and with pollution and, climate change and everything that kind of comes from that. So I don't know. I was first of all, fascinated by them, but second of all, really, really inspired. And it calmed some of my, I think, anxiety being around these incredible students. So I'm with you on that. I'm really hopeful for the future because there's some bright, bright minds out there.
Yeah, exactly. It is very inspiring, and I think that we will rise to solve a lot of these problems. There's a lot of things that can keep us up at night, but that there's probably an equal number of people who are staying up and able to think of solutions or potential solutions to these problems. So thankfully we have everybody working together on this.
Absolutely. Well, Shaena, so you obviously have your blog on Forbes, your column there, where anybody can go and look at that. You're pretty active on Twitter, as far as I can tell, because I see your posts a lot. Tell everybody sort of where they can find your work and how they can say hello after listening to this episode.
Sure. If you listen, the easiest way to say hello is at Dr. Shaena, Shaena, on Twitter. And yeah, I am at Forbes, Forbes.com/science. And then I will be on usually I've written something that will be on the main page because I write a lot. So Shaena Montanari on Forbes. I also have if you find my bio page, there's a little link you can click to follow me. So you get an email every time I write a new post. So yeah, those are the most, and then I also do a little freelancing. I have some pieces this summer as a media fellow for the AAAS at National Geographic. So thank you to the American Geophysical Union for sponsoring my summer fellowship at National Geographic. And so I'll have some pieces coming out there starting in June. So that's exciting too.
Really exciting. That's awesome.
Yes. Busy. Well, so busy.
Yeah, seriously. I know, like more busy now than when you were like in the field, which is hilarious.
Exactly. It's true. It all happens, but it's good. It's good to be, it's good to create a unique, I would say, create a unique skill set and people will come to you and you'll be very busy.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's like some great, great advice from Dr. Montanari. Thank you so much for joining me today. This was a blast.
Oh, thank you. It was great. It's good talking to you. I could talk for hours, so thanks.
Me
it was
too.
Great.
Me too. And hey, everybody listening, thank you for coming back week after week. I'm really looking forward to the next time we all get together to talk nerdy.